A man is lying on his back inside a crack in the earth. The gap above his chest is 18 centimeters wide. Not enough to turn, not enough to lift his arms. He breathes in slow, shallow pulls, because a deep breath might wedge his ribs against the stone and hold him there, in the dark, alone. This is not a horror film. This happened in 2013 in South Africa, and the man crawling through that fracture in the rock was a scientist. He was chasing something that shouldn't have been possible. For over a century, the story of human origins followed a simple shape: a line, ancient ancestors at one end, modern humans at the other, each species passing the torch to the next in an orderly relay toward us. It was tidy, it was reassuring. It suggested that everything that came before was leading somewhere, leading specifically to this, to now, to you. That story just collapsed, and it collapsed inside a cave system so narrow that only a handful of people on Earth were physically capable of entering it. The chamber is called Dinaledi. It sits nearly 30 meters below the surface, reachable only through a vertical chute so tight that rescue workers refuse to attempt it. To get inside, a person has to climb a jagged wall in total darkness, squeeze through a slot barely wider than a human shoulder, and descend a chute so narrow it has been compared to threading a needle with your entire body. No large animal could have wandered in here by accident. No predator could have dragged a carcass through that gap. And yet, scattered across the floor of that chamber, scientists found bones. Not a few. Not one skeleton. At least 15 individuals, men, women, children, some of the most complete hominin remains ever discovered on the African continent. The question that followed was not who were they, the question was, how did they get there? Most people assume that if you go back far enough in the human story, you find something simple, something obviously primitive, a creature that looks the part, hunched, brutish, unmistakably not us. That is not what the bones in Dinaledi Chamber showed. The skull was small, startlingly small, a brain case closer in size to a chimpanzee's than to a modern human's. By the old logic, that alone should have settled the matter. A small brain meant a small mind. A small mind meant no complex behavior, no ritual, no intention, nothing but instinct. But the hands told a different story. Long, curved fingers built for climbing, and at the same time a thumb and wrist structured for fine, precise manipulation. Tool-making hands. The feet were almost indistinguishable from a modern human's, built for the same long, efficient, upright stride that carries us across continents. A climber's hands, a walker's feet, a brain the size of an orange. Scientists gave this creature a name, Homo Naledi, and almost immediately Naledi began breaking the rules it was supposed to follow. Here is the deeper unease. For decades, the underlying assumption, rarely spoken aloud, but structurally present in nearly every model of human evolution, was that brain size and behavioral complexity moved together. Bigger brain, richer inner life, smaller brain, simpler existence. It was a hierarchy, disguised as a timeline, and it let modern humans sit comfortably at the top, the inevitable result of an ever-expanding mind. Naledi does not fit inside that hierarchy, because the placement of those bodies, deep inside a chamber that required deliberate, repeated, dangerous entry, a chamber with no natural way for bodies to end up there by accident, no evidence of water transport, no evidence of predator dragging, left researchers facing a possibility they were not prepared for, that Naledi may have been carrying its dead into the earth on purpose. Sit with that for a moment, not burial in the way we practice it now, no grave goods confirmed, no elaborate ceremony reconstructed, but something, a behavior that required memory of the route, coordination in total darkness, repeated trips into a space so dangerous that a modern, large-brained human researcher had to be selected for narrow shoulders and low body fat just to survive the crawl. If that interpretation holds, it means a creature with a brain, a third the size of ours, may have been engaging in something. Researchers hesitate to call it anything other than mortuary behavior. For over a century, that behavior, treating the dead as something more than discarded biological material, was treated as one of the defining markers of the human mind, a signal that a species had crossed some invisible threshold, that it understood loss, that it understood absence. Naledi should not have crossed that threshold, Not with that brain, not by the old rules. The debate among paleoanthropologists remains unresolved. Some researchers argue the evidence for intentional burial is not yet conclusive, that natural processes, however improbable, cannot be fully ruled out. Others argue the chamber itself is the strongest evidence there is, a space so inaccessible that nothing except a mind capable of planning could have filled it with bodies. But even in disagreement, one thing has already shifted permanently. The line has broken. And there is a second unease sitting just beneath the first, one that rarely makes it into the headlines. Homo Naledi did not live in some ancient, uncontested chapter of the human story, isolated safely in deep time, where it couldn't complicate anything. Dating places these individuals at somewhere between 230 and 300,000 years ago. Homo sapiens, anatomically modern humans, people whose skeletons would be indistinguishable from yours, were already walking the African landscape by then. Which means, for a stretch of time that may have spanned tens of thousands of years, two radically different kinds of human were sharing the same continent, possibly the same rivers, possibly the same horizon. One of them had a brain that would one day build cities, write symphonies, launch instruments into interstellar space. The other had a brain roughly the size of an orange, and, if the researchers pushing the burial hypothesis are correct, a mind capable of confronting death with something that looks unmistakably like grief. They were not sequential chapters in a book, they were neighbours, and only one of them is still here to tell the story. This is where the discomfort stops being academic. Because if intelligence, ritual, and the capacity to mourn are not the exclusive property of large-brained humans, if a creature this small-brained could carry its dead into the deep dark on purpose, then the line we drew between them and us was never as solid as we needed it to be. It was a line drawn after the fact, a line drawn by the survivors. Extinction does not require inferiority. It requires only difference, a difference in circumstance, in numbers, in luck, and history is written exclusively by whichever species happens to still be standing at the end to hold the pen. Homo naledi did not go extinct because it lacked a mind, it went extinct. That is the entire sentence. The reasons remain unknown, buried as deep as the chamber that held its dead. Consider for a moment what it actually took to find them. Not luck, not an accidental discovery by hikers or farmers. It took scientists small enough, brave enough, and specifically chosen for their physical dimensions to fold themselves into total darkness and descend a crack in the world that most human bodies simply cannot pass through. In a strange, quiet way, the chamber selected its own witnesses. Only certain bodies could reach the dead. Only certain minds were built to understand what they found there once they arrived. It raises an uncomfortable mirror. How many other chambers exist in the earth, in the fossil record, in the assumptions we've inherited without examining them that we simply cannot yet reach? How many other minds in the deep past engaged in something we would recognize as sacred and left no trace we know how to find? The absence of evidence has never meant the absence of meaning. It has only ever meant the absence of a witness small enough or humble enough to go looking. There is a final thought worth carrying out of that chamber, back up through the narrow chute, into daylight. We have always told ourselves that we are the point of the story, that the long branching tree of human evolution was quietly building generation after generation toward the arrival of the one species capable of understanding it all. Naledi complicates that story in the most personal way possible. It suggests that the capacity to face death with something more than instinct did not begin with us. It may not even require the kind of mind we assumed was necessary. Somewhere in the dark, 250,000 years ago, something without our intelligence may have understood something we still struggle to accept. That the dead deserve to be carried somewhere. That absence should not simply be left where it falls. And if that is true, if a species with a brain the size of an orange could feel the weight of loss enough to climb down into the earth with it, then the line, separating the human from the almost human, was never where we thought it was. It was never a wall. It was only ever a crack in the rock, waiting for someone small enough to prove it wrong.